This is a Divorce Curious podcast. I'm your host, Lisa Mitchell. If you're here, your life and marriage might kind of suck right now, and I've been exactly where you are. At Divorce Curious, we're going to say the quiet parts out loud. We're going to sit in the anger, confusion, and disappointment that you're feeling and talk about what it looks like to go through the before, during, and after of being divorce curious. I'm glad you're here. This episode is going to be a little bit different than some of my other episodes that have featured interviews and were a little bit more informational. I'm going to just warn you right now that this is both informational and also is going to have a lot of my opinion in it. So I'm going to just caveat that right now because I don't want anybody to get the wrong idea about where we are headed or what is going to happen here today. So there has been an extraordinarily large amount of conversation happening across every social media and news outlet about the changes that are coming to divorce. And in most cases, it is going to be getting harder to get a divorce here in the United States. And that's due in large part to a lot of legislation in almost every state across this country. There is some sort of legislation slated for this session that somehow impacts either requirements to get married in the first place or makes it harder to get divorced if you decide to go down that path. So obviously here at Divorce Curious, I want you to have as much data and as much information as you possibly can as you're considering the next best step for you. And I think it's an important conversation that we need to be having right now. And I won't speak for every state. I don't know every single piece of legislation, but there are definitely some key themes going on here right now. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time just kind of letting you know what's on my radar and encouraging you really to do your homework. So whether you are somebody who is super excited about the idea of getting married and you're planning that for your future, or whether you're somebody who's currently married and you're looking at maybe that isn't the best path for you going forward and you are researching and looking into what is the process and what are the rules for divorce in your state, I'm going to encourage you to take the time. And I know the last thing you want to do if you're excited about getting married or recently engaged or maybe even planning your wedding, the last thing you want to do is spend your time researching the divorce laws in your state or the proposed legislation that could impact divorce in your state. But I will tell you, as many, many people will attest to, the person that you divorce is not the same person that you marry. So although we want to hope that you're not even going to ever have to worry about what divorce rules are or what legislation looks like in your state, it's better safe than sorry when it comes to knowing the rules of engagement. And we're seeing things can change very, very quickly and can shift a lot in the course of just even one administration or even a single legislative session. Things can really, really change. And so it's always important to just kind of keep up on these topics and be informed of what the rules are. And for divorce, it's primarily governed by the state at this point. So it would really be up to you to understand what are the current laws in your state that are going to govern the rules of the road when it comes to looking at the divorce process or marriage requirements. And then also, when are those changing? So usually at the beginning of every legislative session, especially when there's a change of administration like we've seen here recently, there is going to be a whole host of proposed House bills and Senate bills that are going to be on the docket at the beginning of the session. Track the status of those. Some of those are going to just be put out there because somebody's trying to satisfy their constituency and they want to say that they put a bill forward for something that they think people want. Others of them are really going to get some legs underneath them and go through all the readings and then maybe even go up to a vote and then become law. So it's a long haul. It's a lot to pay attention to, but it is an important topic. So I want to encourage you to get involved with that. Legiscan.com is a great site that you can go to. You can search by topic, by state, by bill number, if you know what the House bill or the Senate bill number is. You can set reminders. You can get statuses when your bills are making movement or when the language has been changed, because you got to just really really pay attention to these things. Not that we don't have enough other things to pay attention to right now, but I want to encourage you to be informed and know what you're getting into, regardless of what part of your path that you are on. It is important to be informed and engaged. So I want to talk about one of the hot topics that if you've spent any time on social media lately, and this is at all a topic that is top of mind for you, is the idea of changes to no-fault divorce. So right now in our country, pretty much every state has some sort of no-fault divorce provision. And just for common understanding here, the definition of no-fault divorce is a divorce that does not require either spouse to prove that the other is at fault for the marriage's breakdown. So instead, you can basically just state, the marriage is broken down because of irreconcilable differences, right? It doesn't have to be proven. You don't have to have it be somebody's fault. There doesn't have to be infidelity or fraud or anything noted. It just is an irretrievable breakdown, irreconcilable differences, incompatibility, or after a period of separation. So those are kind of the most common reasons why people file no-fault divorce. And some states actually have a true no-fault divorce statute in place, which means even if it is somebody's fault, if there was infidelity or there was abuse or there was fraud, it doesn't matter. You can't assign blame to that person for divorce. It's truly a no-fault divorce state. And currently, as of January 2025, when I'm recording this, those states are Wisconsin, Oregon, Washington, Nevada, Nebraska, Montana, Missouri, Minnesota, Michigan, Kentucky, Kansas, Illinois, Iowa, Indiana, Hawaii, Florida, Colorado, and California. So in that case, the person seeking the divorce is actually not permitted to allege a fault. So the biggest difference that we're seeing is that now, because there is a shift in the administration and there is a shift to kind of redefine and push what is a traditional family, which for those of you that aren't familiar with the current terminology, traditional family, that is defined as a man and a woman living in the same home with children. Like that's the ideal traditional family that's trying to really be maintained, we'll say, or we won't say mandated, but the goal is to maintain that traditional family is defined as a man and a woman with children, all living in the same home married. The man and woman married, living in the same home with their children. That's kind of the North Star of the definition of family for the current administration. And that's kind of what they're driving and what's really driving at the state level a lot of these bills that are coming in to more closely align how the state's marriage and divorce definitions work and how the process is aligned to maintain that ultimate kind of national level goal and definition of traditional family. So the bills going in are mainly around eliminating no-fault divorce. So it's put up or shut up is the most simple way that I can put it. There really is this idea that like now, instead of just being able to say that there's an irretrievable breakdown or there are irreconcilable differences, or this is just a decision that even we're mutually agreeing to pursue the divorce, that neither one of us want to be in this marriage anymore, that there will be a higher standard to meet in order to get that divorce granted. So instead of it being, hey, no fault, no blame, no real proof or documentation needed as far as why the marriage is irretrievably broken, there's going to be a burden of proof or a requirement or a standard that is going to need to be met in order to get the judge to grant the divorce as requested. And in many cases, that's even if both people want it. This isn't like a divorce where one party's serving the other and that party like refusing to go or doesn't want the divorce. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about in cases even uncontested divorce by both parties is there may be now in family law, there may be higher standards that you have to meet in order for the judge to actually grant the divorce and let you both go legally your separate ways or be free to pursue another partner or another relationship or another marriage or to be happily single. So I think it's important to understand that it's not just a contested or if one party doesn't want it, that there can be an extra burden of proof or an extra threshold that needs to be met to get the divorce granted by the courts. It may just be they're not going to grant it. You're going to be stuck together legally as far as the court's concerned. And I think there's a really interesting piece of legislation right now in Tennessee that's been, and I'll just pick on Tennessee because it's one of the most detailed pieces I was able to pull up here when I was looking quickly. But this was a bill, House Bill 0315, introduced by Republican Representative Chris Hurt from West Tennessee. And this has to do with the idea of like a covenant marriage. And covenant marriage is kind of marriage plus, I guess. There's a lot of controversy and a lot of history around covenant marriages. But if you choose in Tennessee to enter into a covenant marriage, there are actually more restrictions on how and when you would be allowed to separate and get a divorce. So basically, it says here, couples would be expected to remain together for the rest of their lives, and the marriage could only end in specific circumstances such as adultery, or if your spouse is sentenced to death or life in prison for committing a crime and being convicted of that. So, I mean, there are exceptions to every rule, even here in Tennessee's covenant marriage proposal. But so this covenant marriage idea is really interesting because it's really a way, a label to put on a marriage that makes it extra restrictive and gives it a more defined set of parameters. So in this case, covenant marriages exclude same-sex couples. It's only for a man and a woman. Couples would also need to get counseling about the nature, purposes, and responsibility of marriage. And that would need to come either from a faith leader or a licensed counselor. So that would be kind of your mandated premarital counseling, not just, if you're of a certain religious belief or if you choose to have a faith-based premarital session, or if it's required by your church. This would actually be more from a court level for people wanting to enter into a covenant marriage. And you also have to sign off on a statement that says, hey, this marriage is a covenant between a man and a woman who live together for the rest of their lives. And you would also be obligated to seek marriage counseling before you could be divorced. So again, a little higher threshold of things you would need to do before you would be able to execute that divorce. And you could only get a judgment of divorce, again, through the judicial system, family law, if spouses can prove that their partner committed adultery, committed a felony and was sentenced to death or life in prison, abandoned their home for more than a year and refused to return, or has physically or sexually abused them or a child. The bill also allows divorces if spouses have lived separately without reconciliation for 2 years, or if they were separated and have lived apart for a year. And then there's some things, separation is kind of considered a separate act. And there's some allowances for, if you can prove, again, to the court satisfaction, habitual intemperance, cruel treatment, outrageous conduct. So basically the threshold is that it is a very high standard. And again, anything where it says prove or present evidence means that the court has to accept that. It has to meet their threshold. And again, there's so many variances based on what the judges are going to accept and what maybe their personal bias is as satisfactory thresholds being met. It's really just a gray space. And if a separation is granted, you're not at liberty to marry again. The separation would only end the conjugal cohabitation of the couple, not their matrimonial bonds. So you may be able to get separated, but you wouldn't be able to get divorced and you wouldn't be able to remarry. So right now, this is what we're seeing in a lot of areas. I don't think there's really anything else substantial to mention there. But the point, the overarching theme and similarity in all of these bills, or the vast majority of these bills that have been introduced this session, is that the definition of marriage is getting much more specific. And the definition of the traditional family is being more clearly defined, I guess, as a man and a woman living together in their home with children. Marriage being only between a man and a woman, right? So that comes with a whole other host of conflict, contradiction, limiting of rights, right? There's a whole bunch of things just by the nature of what a marriage is, what a traditional family is, and then what you have to do to get married in the first place, up to and including choosing a covenant marriage versus traditional marriage. And some states are proposing that you would get either a financial incentive for choosing a covenant marriage, or you would get access to free counseling or faith-based counseling. You would get a lower marriage license fee than if you choose a non-covenant marriage, which gives you a little bit more flexibility in getting out of it than a covenant marriage does. So there's all these little incentives or these little penalties, but in totality, what it is, it's if you don't get married under the terms that we believe you should get married under, it's going to either cost you more, it's going to be restrictive, or there's going to be some sort of penalty around it. So marriage is not a zero-sum game. It never has been, but now it's like right from the jump. You know that right from the jump that kind of the rules of engagement, pun intended, around marriage have changed and are changing or are being proposed to have some pretty significant changes. And when it comes to divorce, there's a bill right now in Indiana that would be, again, requiring a threshold of what would justify a divorce. So whereas right now, Indiana is kind of a mandatory no-fault state, like you can't make it somebody's fault that the divorce is happening, even if you have irrefutable evidence, they would be switching that to now you have to have proof or cause that satisfies the threshold of the law, or that satisfies the threshold of the judge sitting on the bench in the courtroom that you're in. And this bill, as of the first reading of it, which is when I looked at it last, mandated that if you were filing for divorce, you had to file, you had to go to a hearing, you had to bring a witness of someone who could kind of corroborate your claim of irretrievable breakdown in your marriage. And then even with that, the judge could say, I'm going to require you to go to counseling first. And so they can not grant the divorce. They can, or make the divorce contingent on counseling and then the outcomes of that counseling, which again, when you think about, they're not paying for the counseling. So that's expense. So you have to pay the expense to file. You now have to have a hearing. You have to have somebody else take time off and show up for you as your witness. Now you have to pay for counseling. You have additional attorney's fees if that's the route you went, where you're paying an attorney for filing extra paperwork and doing these extra things and coming to court with you. So there is very much a monetary cost to this procedural or proposed procedural change that isn't really addressed here, but is from a practical standpoint. If you think of the financial situation that a lot of people are in when they're going through the process of divorce, it's usually not great. Like people don't have extra money to be paying a couple $100 a pop for counseling sessions or paying attorney's fees for extra hours of procedural or paperwork being done on their behalf to get this divorce. So they can mandate counseling. You can do the counseling. I think it's like within 45 days. And then depending on, I don't know if the counselor's like verifying that there's irretrievable, or I don't know kind of what that process paperwork will look like to say, yes, we went to counseling and they agree or whatever. But then you have to like kind of refile or like submit that you completed, you checked that mandatory box. And if you don't do that within like 90 days, they just throw the whole thing out. And if you want to continue to pursue divorce, you go back to the circus again and you start back at phase one. So additional cost, additional time. They're not coming out and saying, okay, we're getting rid of divorce or we're not allowing you to divorce. But it's all of these like death by 1,000 paper cuts. It's extra time, it's extra steps, it's extra money. And if you are in a marriage that has become unsafe or unhealthy, damaging to your mental health or financially punitive to you in some way, just all of these extra steps above and beyond just your freedom of choice to say, this marriage is not healthy or safe or what I want anymore. If you have the option to decide that you want to get married, when that's not the best choice for you anymore, you should have the option to not be married anymore. And I warned y'all I was going to be coming out with my opinions. I've given you lots of facts and some examples of legislation going on, but I think fundamentally this just falls in line if you look in totality of all the things that are happening right now. And I'm not going to get super political, but there's definitely an attempt to give certain groups of people less freedom and less rights. And there are calculated attempts to make getting the rights we have now harder to execute and exercise and benefit from. And there are restrictions, both time and money, just emotional exhaustion. If you've ever been through a divorce, you know, like sometimes the only thing that keeps you going is the fact that you can count that it's going to end at some point. Like at some point, eventually, you're going to get that checkbox of like, okay, you're divorced, divorce is granted, and you can get on with your new normal and figuring out what life is going to look like after that. And everything about most of the current legislation that is specifically around marriage or specifically around divorce right now. And it's all in the name of protecting the traditional family. And you can call it protecting the traditional family, but if the cost of that is you are removing rights and you are removing the ability for people, and this would be for guys too. So this isn't just like women are stuck or women don't have the choice. It's going to get harder for men to get divorced too. Now, will there be bias towards granting that with less restriction and hoops and a quicker time frame than granting a woman? I mean, who knows, right? Some of it's going to depend on the state you're in, the political climate, the judges on the bench, how the language sorts out throughout the legislative sessions. Like there's going to be a lot of variance when you look totality across what's happening in each state. There always is. Divorce has always kind of been a state mandated thing from the judicial standpoint of things. But in totality, there are some very reoccurring and prevalent themes happening here. And I did a TikTok on this. It really kind of took off. And I'm divorced. I got my divorce. Even that was like without all of these extra steps and hoops, was not fun, was not cheap, and was not fast. And I don't know very many people whose divorces would qualify as fun, cheap, or fast, right? Just that's without all this extra stuff. But more recently, I've been thinking about the impact of, you know, I have a daughter who's an adult now, and she has it on her kind of like life plan when we play pretend of, okay, what does your life look like 5 years, 10 years, 15, 20 years out? And traditionally there has been a result of, marriage and family and all of that being part of the plan. And that's always been something really exciting and something that has been great to think about and has felt a little bit, maybe not easy, but like natural and a little less risky of, I'm going to get married in good faith. I'm going to assume everything is going to go well. But if it doesn't, at least I'm not trapped. At least I have the option where if I need to, if it's unsafe for me, if it's not safe for my mental health, if there's a fraud situation, you know, like you never know what's going to happen. So many people get divorced and they would have never thought when they got married that the things that happen, but they do. And for me to think of her being trapped or being at the mercy of some arbitrary threshold to be able to get her freedom back or not, or to be able to separate herself from someone in a relationship that's very damaging to her and possibly damaging to children, that's pretty terrifying. And that's a conversation that I know it's not just me having that with my adult child. It is lots of people having those conversations now where it's like, you just hate it because you don't want to be introducing fear and you don't want to be discouraging them from picturing their life a certain way. But you also, I think as a parent, your whole heart is just focused on how can I protect this thing I love more than anything? And how can I help her have the best life possible? And how can I help her make decisions that are going to support the things I know that she wants in her life and the way that she's going to be healthiest and happiest? And the reality is for a lot of people in a lot of states right now, marriage is looking riskier and riskier. And I don't think anybody ever goes into marriage thinking, oh, well, I'll just get out of it if it doesn't work. But I think there is some peace of mind way back in the archives that you don't really want to talk about, but you kind of just know that if I need to get a divorce, I can. And now maybe you can't. And so what's the option? To me, it's such a contradiction and it's so counterproductive that for a movement and an administration that says that they want to protect and grow traditional families and they want to encourage more marriage and more children, and yet are systemically doing things through legislation and economic policy and from the point of maintaining rights or removing rights that really make people who otherwise would really be like all about that traditional family think twice or totally avoid it, because now it's not a choice. I don't have the choices to do the things I want to do. So now I don't feel safe doing any of it at all anymore. Like, how counterproductive is that? Where you are impeding and creating doubt and creating a level of risk around the very thing you say you want to maintain, uphold, and grow. I mean, it is just one of the many things that baffle my mind right now, but I would be remiss, especially here on the Divorce Curious podcast, to not bring this conversation to you and raise the awareness. Again, the whole point of this podcast has never been to champion divorce or discourage marriage. It has always been to inform and equip and support whatever phase you're in, whether you're divorce curious, you're mid-divorce, you're post-divorce, or now maybe if you're even considering getting married, like it's a good time to start thinking about and being educated on what's happening on the legislative landscape. Because if it doesn't apply to you now, it could at some point, like stuff happens. But I hate that I even have to talk about this. Like, I hate that there has to be an element of risk that didn't need to be there, simply to be extra restrictive and extra penalizing and extra punitive, and removing rights, removing freedom, removing choice from something that most women, speaking for my own gender, my own experience, are really excited to do, just if they had the choice to do it. So I don't know. Sorry, I got a little ranty, but anyways, no, I can rest securely knowing that at least I have done my part to bring attention to what is going on. Educate yourself. Go to legiscan.com. Go to your state, your legislative review. It's probably yourstate.gov, and you can find your way from there. Keep an eye on the national conversations too. You just never know what's going to come up or get revisited from a national standpoint. But I just want everybody to be able to be in the power of knowing what's going on and being able to make the best decision for you, fully informed of what is possible or what is coming or when it happens, what the law of the land is. So do your research, follow the bills that are related to marriage or divorce in your state, follow bills about anything that you care about. There are thousands of bills in every state legislature at the beginning of every legislative session, and how far they go is anybody's guess, and how many end up being law of the land is always a wild card, but you need to know. You just need to know. It's your responsibility. And if you're someone who's considering getting married or somebody who's contemplating divorce, it's even more important that you know, because some of these things at least in Indiana, things that are in consideration right now under legislation and House bills could become effective, could be laws, could be the way this state functions around marriage and divorce as early as July 1 of 2025. As of the time I'm recording this, like, that's not very long. It's a significant impact and change in consideration to so many people. So don't be caught sleeping. Be an educated person. Use your voice. Let your legislative representatives know what you support, what you don't support, why you feel the way you do. Don't be passive. Don't assume things aren't going to change, because they can and they will. And just stay informed. I want you to have what you need and all the consideration and all the surrounding facts, so you can make the next best decision for you in whatever step comes next for you. So that's what I'm here for. That's what Divorce Curious is here for in the community here. I would love to know what you're seeing at your state's level. So leave a comment. Please like, share, follow this podcast. Send it to somebody that you know that is either thinking about getting married or is thinking about maybe getting divorced. Help your people. Like, this is important stuff. This is a big issue, but I really encourage you to engage, like, follow, share, comment wherever you're seeing this, whatever platform you're on. I'm going to keep my ear to the ground on this and keep you updated on my social media channels and my TikTok. It's Divorce Curious Help. We'll see what's going on. We'll try to just keep our eyes open together and keep making good decisions. But anyways, until next time, friends, stay informed and stay curious.